So we brushed over this topic a little bit before, but I figured this would be a real good time to hone in on the situation. We got one from Bob Blaze, and it's in regards to Shirou and Emiya. He believes that they can't trace divine constructs, and he thought that's why they couldn't comprehend Aya. But if Excalibur is also a divine construct, and they can replicate its image, what's the real difference between the two? Why couldn't he do the same thing for Aya? And then he goes on to say the same thing for other constructs for that matter. This is something that's better examined if you look at the confrontation that Shirou had with Gilgamesh in the UB-Dub route. When the fight first starts, Shirou is going through agonizing levels of pain just for him to hang with Gilgamesh. He was put in a situation where he had to go phantasm for phantasm, despite the fact that his body was unprepared for it. He's coughing up blood every 2 seconds, his brain is getting fried, his vessel is getting fried, and even with him having the temporary crest from Ren, even with her help, he's going way beyond his limits way too early. And it's very clear that he would have died if he didn't finish off Gil fast enough. All of that was fine for Shirou up until the point where Gilgamesh pulled out something that he was unfamiliar with, that being his most treasured weapon, Aya. By design, it's something that transforms into the concept of a sword. It's been told plenty of times that it's one of the only weapons that predate the concept of swords even existing. So Aya is an anomaly in its own right. And most important of all, its background tells us that it was made from materials that don't even come from our world. When he first pulled it against Iskander, the Zero novel tells us it was something that was constructed by a god, meaning Aya himself, before humans. It was the actualization of the works of God recorded at the beginning of the world. So here's the thing. When Gilgamesh first pulls out Aya, Shirou is forced to erase 3 blueprints that he had loaded because he was trying to keep up with the other weapons that Gilgamesh was putting out. He had to erase those entirely. So those were a waste of his time. That was one of his biggest problems. You see how much effort Shirou is putting into just keeping up? Yes, he erased the blueprints that he loaded, but that doesn't erase the pain that he had to go through to load them. It doesn't erase the energy that he used to start the process. It's a blatant sacrifice that he had to take in order to survive. It's almost like Kiritsugu going through the pain of him using his time altar and then not retaliating. It's like, what was the point? You just went through all that pain for no reason. And the reason that Shirou got rid of these blueprints is because he had to give so much focus to Aya. So before I get into the obvious answer, you could say by that alone, Shirou was under so much mental and physical stress already that Aya would have just sent him over the top. So that's one factor already. This might lead you to ask the question, okay, if this was Shirou at the beginning of the fight, or maybe if Gilgamesh was fighting against Emiya himself instead, would he be able to pull it off? Not exactly. And Nasu has addressed this several times because he's also been asked this question. From the Fate Materials, he's been asked, what's the limit of UB-Dub's replication? And he says himself, divine constructs like Aya and Excalibur are non-replicable. There might be some degraded MPs with similar performance in stock though. And this of course is referring to Excalibur's image. Then you have his description from the Fate Zero animation guide. He says that Aya, the Sword of Rupture, is a sword that only Gilgamesh possesses. For that reason, even Unlimited Blade Works, the infinite creation of swords, cannot recreate it. Nobody said that Emiya can't project divine constructs. He's done it before. It's just that usually they're not 1-1, and it depends what it is. Then you have Shirou go into greater detail saying that he outright can't read the weapon. And this goes back into that lack of information or that familiarity that I mentioned that they need to replicate an armament. Think about it like this. He also shouldn't have been able to replicate Zelrech's jewel sword, but he did it. His jewel sword can create true magic. So Shirou essentially cheesed his way to true magic, and if his body wasn't already decaying in Heaven's Field, that would have been a huge deal for him. The moment that Ren provided him with the blueprints, that's all he needed to close the gap and make something of his likeness. So what's stopping him from making Aya? He doesn't even know where to start. He has no idea how to process this weapon because, as I mentioned before, it's made from materials that existed before this world was conceptualized. He says it himself, I could read every weapon up until this point, but the moment he pulled out Aya, no dice. So it's less about about him not being able to do it, and more so of him needing the blueprint, and there's no way for him to go about obtaining this. Hell, to this day, we still don't know where Aya comes from ourselves. We know it comes from the gods, we know it comes from his background, but the materials, the process, the meaning of his formation has always been purposely kept a mystery. I feel like the better question here would be, why would he want to project Aya? Remember, Shirou has had Avalon in his body for majority of his life, so if he could reproduce any divine constructs or armaments for that matter, he would always be more suited for the ones that surround Saber, Avalon being one of them. Avalon is a divine construct. He projected this in the Fate route when she was going against Gil in the second fight. Again, this is the only 1-1 projection of a divine construct that he's made because he has that affinity with Avalon from being with it for so long. But there are conditions. He has to be paired with Saber in order for him to do this. It just eases that blueprint load. I know a lot of people who don't know what's going on would just say, oh, that's just convenience. If you think about the way that he made Caliburn for the first time in the Fate route, he never saw Caliburn. The best that he could make on his own was transforming a branch into a bow. That was the best that he could do at that time because he didn't really have interactions with Archer that route, because that's not what the route was about, until he reached into Saber's memories and pulled the blueprint from there, because he can get the blueprint that way as well. That's why I'm specifically saying that Shirou did it, and you won't see Emiya getting a blueprint like this because he doesn't have that tie with Saber anymore. Plus he has raw eyes anyway. Excluding Avalon, you got Excalibur Morgan, another divine construct. We've seen Shirou himself project the image of this at the end of Heaven's Field in the normal ending, where he destroys the Grail. Of course, we know this took his life, but he was already dying anyway from the arm, so he would have lost his life regardless. We can take this even further and go into Prisma Ilya. You have Igalima and Sul Sagana, the two colossal swords that can be found in Gil's Gate. Both of those are divine constructs, and he's been seen copying the both of them in his fight against Angelica. So he definitely can't project constructs. It's how familiar he is with that weapon and what it is. And just like what happened to him with Gil in the UB-Dub route, the same thing happened when Miyu Shirou was fighting against Angelica. Angelica didn't pull out Aya until the end of the match. So by that point, even though Shirou was getting that constant pool of mana from Miyu, that still doesn't change the fact of all the energy that he's used up until that point. So you're asking him to go all out at the very end of the fight, on top of everything that he's already done. And we find out that it's still highly unlikely that he could do it regardless. And it really just goes to show how impressive Aya is as a weapon that he decided not to copy it. Because as we all saw, this man used his entire UB-Dub vault instead of trying to process Aya. Using his entire reserves of UB-Dub would be an easier process than trying to read Aya once. And that alone should let you know it's just that complicated of a weapon. That by itself speaks volumes. Now, could he do something if he got the hands on the blueprints? Or maybe he was sent down a path where he's able to come into contact with Aya's creation? Maybe things would be different. Looking at Emiya, he's a counter guardian. If Emiya was sunk into Gil's age and he happened to come across Aya's construction, he may have been able to process this. But even considering, it still predates the concept of swords, and that's what its whole ability is based around. So it pretty much cancels out. And it also predates the concept of humans. Why would Elias send him to a time before humans existed? That's the whole point of Elias. You see what I mean? So there's no real logical way for him to do this, no matter how you spin it. And for divine constructs, another example, you have the event straight out of Lost Belt 6, where Muramasa was able to create the essence of Excalibur, largely thanks to him being in Shirou's body, still a divine construct, and he still made it, even though it took sacrificing his life in order to do it. It's just another one of those unique circumstances. He just has that bond with certain armaments. He is a connoisseur of weapons in general. I mean, the very fact that he was even able to make UB-Dub kind of speaks to that, even if it doesn't outright tell you. Now, at this point, I just know people are gonna come on here and say, well, can he project Rongo Miniot? I don't know, bro. Can he project Rongo Miniot? Have you ever seen him do that? Then probably not. It's like, bro, people will say anything to gas him up. Just let the man be great. The head cannon brigade strikes again.